Earlier this year, my wife and I rented a toy booth in a local toy antique mall. We just rent a small amount of space. And while I know a lot about retro and vintage 80s and 90s toys, I don't know a lot about displaying those things. Our booth has pegboard and we've been hanging things off of pegs, but my wife wanted to up the ante, so to speak, a little bit. And so she came up with the idea of putting a table in our booth, and at the end of the table, she wanted a set of shelves. Now, I bought a piece of wood to build the table, and she wanted it exactly 16 inches deep, which meant at the end of the table, we needed a set of shelves that would also be 16 inches wide. I could not find any shelves that were 16 inches wide. I went on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace and looked for narrow shelves and couldn't find anything. So then I just started messaging everyone who was selling shelves on Facebook Marketplace. And the best ones I found were these Billy Bookshelves. This is from Ikea. They're made of actual wood, not that cheap stuff that just comes apart. But of course the problem is these shelves are exactly 32 inches wide, and what I need are a set of shelves that are 16 inches wide. And so I decided to take a shot and cut these things right down the middle. Believe it or not, these shelves are exactly 32 inches wide. The shelves on the inside are 31 inches wide, and the two outside pieces of wood are a ½ inch thick. So literally all I need to do is saw these shelves right down the middle and then reattach the one side to the other, and I should end up with a set of 16-inch wide shelves. After removing all the shelves, the next thing I needed to do was remove that flimsy back piece they always attach to these things. Well, that's one way to do it. I am available for parties and demos. By the way, I don't recommend doing this, especially not without gloves. This was an easy way to find all the nails and splinters that were in this bookcase. I'm terribly lazy, I'm bad at measuring, and I really wanted every one of the shelves to be exactly the same width. So what I decided to do was make a little template out of some spare plywood. So I measured exactly 15 inches, and then I cut this template so that I could put it on each shelf, draw the line, and know exactly where to cut. It's less important on this project that all the shelves are exactly 15 inches wide. It's more important that they're all exactly the same width. So after measuring exactly 15 inches on this shelf, I used my Ryobi circular saw and cut it right down the middle. However, I began to have this feeling like I was about to have a Looney Tunes moment and have these shelves split exactly in half. I have to come up with a better way to do this, and so that's where these sawhorses are going to come in. These sawhorses are plastic. They're not particularly strong, but they will do the job here. And so my idea is to lay the shelves over on their side, cut all the shelves in half, and then hope that the top half remains balanced on the bottom half long enough for me to remove it without everything falling over. So again, I'm using that plywood template that I made that's exactly 15 inches wide. I'm drawing my line, and then I use that Ryobi circular saw to cut through the shelf horizontally. I don't necessarily recommend using a circular saw like this, but when you're a professional like me, I think it's all right. By the way, I learned that there's some trim pieces down here that my saw would not go all the way through, and so I'm going to have to finish this cut later with a jigsaw. You know the old saying, measure twice, cut once? I don't know what happened, but the first time I drew this line, for some reason, it was not at a 90-degree angle, so I had to redo this cut. Now, fortunately, these shelves are exactly 30 inches wide, which means it's 15 inches on either side. So if I screwed up one side, I still have the other side of the shelves to use. And so that's kind of what ended up happening here. But man, it really pays to double check your lines before you start cutting with a saw. The last thing holding the shelves together is that little trim piece on the baseboard I told you about. So I used my jigsaw to trim through that, and once I did that, I was able to remove the top half of the shelves. Now I have shelves that are exactly the width I want. They just seem to be missing one side. If you've ever assembled IKEA shelves, you have a good idea how to unassemble IKEA shelves. All these little twisty nut things had to be turned, and the pieces of wood had to be removed from the little metal inserts that hold them in place. The only difficulty I had at all was the shelves were sticky because these shelves have been painted, and some of the paint was holding everything in place. As I continued to disassemble these shelves, I learned that the shelves were originally black. Now, the seller provided me with a small can of touch-up paint. It's the same color he used to paint the shelves, and I'm really hoping there's going to be enough paint to cover all these black spots on the shelves. Between the sawing and the original paint, there were a lot of rough edges on this, and so I decided to grab my Ryobi orbital sander and just go over everything really quickly. This isn't a commercial for Ryobi tools, but I do love the fact that I have all these different tools and they all use the same battery, so I could just grab a tool off my workbench, come out and do something real quick and move on. Maybe this is a commercial for Ryobi tools. If you've seen my previous projects, you know that I always use two tools. I use a drill and I use an impact driver, and that's because I hate switching bits back and forth between drilling and the little screw attachment. So I've got my two things here, and what I'm going to do is start reattaching the other side of the shelf. I'm going to use my little plastic T-square to make sure that everything is a 90-degree angle, and these screws are going right into the ends of these other boards. I don't want to screw this up, so I'm going to pre-drill all of these holes and then use my impact driver to push these wood screws down in and hold everything together. Because these shelves are going to be used to display toys, including possibly little cars that would be on wheels, I'm taking my time with the little T-square and making sure that all of these are 90 degrees and level. Just a few more screws, and eventually we now have a set of shelves that are exactly 16 inches wide. But we're not done yet. We've got a little bit more work to do. One of the problems I have is that all the shelves I removed are still 30 inches wide. I need them to be 15 inches wide, and so I used that same piece of plywood template that I used before. I put it on the shelves and I cut all the shelves exactly in half. This is going to work out perfect. So after looking at the shelves, one thing I realized is that the back was much rougher than the front. Normally, you would not see shelves like this from the back, but in our toy booth, you're going to be able to see them from either side. And so the first thing I decided to do was run over the entire back surface with my Ryobi orbital sander. Now, the problem is that the back of these shelves, the wood is not really finished. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to cover up some of this rough wood and make it presentable. On the inside of the shelves, you can see some of the black underlying paint, and so now's the time to use that touch-up paint and give everything another coat of gray paint. I've been told before that watching some of my videos is like watching paint dry, so I won't make you watch the part where the paint dries, only the part where the paint is wet. After the paint dried, you can see the shelves are starting to come together. They look pretty good. There's a few more black spots I need to touch up, but other than that, they look all right. But man, there's just something missing, something that needs a little bit of pizzazz. So I had to sleep on it, and the next day it came to me. The pizzazz this thing needs is some red duct tape to go on the ends of the shelves. I think this is going to look great. What could possibly go wrong? My idea here is to center the tape on each piece of wood. I'll use that X-Acto knife to cut any corners that I need to wrap it around, but other than that, it should be pretty simple. I'm just going to make sure to press the duct tape down to make sure it sticks to the wood as I go along, and I want to use one solid piece for these long runs so that things don't peel and that it doesn't look dumb. So again, here as you can see, I'm using that X-Acto knife and just cutting little slices on either side of this so I can wrap this around and it'll stick to the wood. I'll use that same technique when I put the tape on the side pieces of wood. But by doing this on both sides of the shelves, now the front looks exactly like the back. Now it's just a matter of rinse and repeat. I'll do the other sides. We're going to do the middles of the shelves. And then I'll flip everything over and do the other side. Again, this is going to give the shelves just a little bit of pop of color. Our shelves in the booth itself are painted red, so this will tie everything together. I think it's going to turn out good. Now we have to do the fronts and backs of the shelves. I'm cutting these roughly to length. I mean, we're not entering this in an art contest, and people aren't going to focus on these shelves. Hopefully they'll be looking at what we're selling that's on the shelves, but I do want it to look pretty good. So I'm taking a little extra time here and trying to measure everything to make sure that there's not a whole bunch of overlap. I think that would make it look really obvious that it's tape. Applying all that tape took a lot longer than I thought it was going to, and when I was finished, I was only half done. Now I have to flip the shelves over onto their front or their back or whatever and do the other side. Again, I want these to look basically the same from either side. It turns out there are only so many ways to describe applying tape to a set of shelves. I've tried everything I can to make this interesting, but you get the idea. There's red tape, there were shelves. The final part of the project involves standing the shelf unit up, placing the shelves back where they go, and applying the final bits of red tape to those shelves. It was a bit more difficult to apply the tape while the shelves were standing up, but it wasn't that hard. The real problem was I started getting wrinkles in the tape as I was applying them, so I was able to mostly massage those out with my thumbs, but there was one piece where I had to completely redo it because it just didn't look right. And so our booth went from looking like this to this. The shelves are at the end of our booth. We're able to display things. We've sold a lot more stuff with having front-facing merchandise. We've also added some hooks on the side so we can display even more items here. And the biggest problem we have now is that our booth is so full. So please check out the description, come visit our booth, and say hi to Pennywise while you're there.